In the history of humankind, there is an unwritten rule. Great victories are meant to be immortalized immediately. In the aftermath of World War II, memorials to the fallen and the victorious began to appear all across Europe. This is a natural impulse, to solidify a triumph in the memory of generations while the events are still fresh. However, for some reason, this rule doesn't apply at all to the events of the early 19th century. The war, known in Russia as the Patriotic War and in Germany as the Battle of the Nations, is shrouded in a strange silence. The victors seemed in no hurry to declare their triumph, waiting 50, 70, or in some cases an entire century before erecting their monuments. This colossal delay is not just a historical curiosity. It's a genuine anomaly that casts doubt on the official version of events. It's as if the true story was intentionally allowed to fade, only to be replaced later by stone monuments bearing a carefully crafted legend. We will embark on a journey across Europe to examine these belated memorials. They are not merely tributes, but actual riddles filled with mysterious symbols, erased inscriptions, and double meanings. Each one is a key to a secret that, perhaps, is still being hidden from us. And we will begin our investigation in the very heart of Russia, in Moscow, with a monument familiar to everyone, except its main secret was deliberately chiseled away from the stone. In the center of Moscow stands a majestic structure known to all as the Triumphal Arch. The official story we've learned since childhood states that it is a monument designed by architect Joseph Beauvais to honor the victory of the Russian people in the Patriotic War of 1812. The arch's foundation was laid in 1814, but its construction dragged on for 20 long years, which is already questionable in itself. On the surface, everything seems logical. A great victory deserves a great monument. It even has a plaque confirming its purpose. But if we delve deeper into the history of this monument, the neat picture begins to crumble before our eyes, leaving behind only cold bewilderment. The fact is, in old illustrations and documents from that time, the arch is referred to by a much more mundane and universal name. Simply the Triumphal Gates. This name strips it of its unique patriotic aura and places it in the same category as dozens of similar gates around the world, from Rome to Paris. Its architecture, with its classical columns and winged figures, also carries nothing specifically Russian. Similar elements can be found in Italy, France, or even Africa. It looks like a standard design that could be dedicated to any triumph, in any country. This is the first inconsistency that makes one wonder. Was the arch originally dedicated to the victory over Napoleon at all? But the most important and alarming discovery awaits us when we examine the very plaque that should have dispelled all doubts. The inscription, explaining in whose honor the monument was erected, was intentionally and completely destroyed. This was not the work of time or vandals. It was a deliberate act of erasing history. In 1912, on the eve of the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Borodino, a decision was made to renovate the arch. This restoration proved to be so thorough that the last remnants of the old original inscription vanished completely. In photographs taken after this update, we see a perfectly clean, smooth surface. A gaping void where the historical dedication should have been carved in stone. Consider the absurdity of the situation. For the anniversary of a great victory, the main monument to this victory is not restored to emphasize its historical value, but is effectively reset, wiping key information from its face. Who could have given such an order? And more importantly, why? What was written on that plaque that it needed to be so radically concealed on the eve of a national celebration? This act of vandalism, disguised as restoration, turns the majestic monument into a silent witness. Officially, it remains a memorial to the War of 1812. But in reality, we are looking at a classical triumphal gate without a single word of confirmation. The history of this structure has become a mystery. Perhaps this is just an unfortunate exception, a strange episode in the history of one particular city. To check this, we need to leave Russia and travel to Germany. There, in the heart of Europe, stands another grandiose memorial dedicated to the very same events: the anti-Napoleonic Wars of Liberation. And as we will soon see, it holds just as many secrets, and its inscriptions, unlike the erased one in Moscow, are even more vague and evasive. If the story from Moscow, with its erased inscription, seems like a strange, isolated case, a journey into the heart of Germany will dispel those doubts. Here, in Bavaria, on the banks of the Danube, stands the monumental Hall of Liberation. It is a colossal structure, a giant cylinder nearly 60 meters high, crowned with a massive dome. It was built in 1863, exactly half a century after the key events of the anti-Napoleonic Wars. The project was entrusted to the prominent German architect Leo von Klenze, a name we will encounter again in our investigation, and whose hand shaped iconic buildings not only in Germany, but also in Russia. Externally, the memorial is breathtaking. Its walls are supported by 18 massive buttresses, each adorned with a statue symbolizing one of the ancient Germanic tribes. It is a grand pantheon, designed to embody the unity of the nation and the greatness of its spirit. Officially, it is dedicated to the memory of the heroes who fell in the Wars of Liberation of 1813 to 1814. But as soon as we get closer and try to read the messages left by its creators, we once again encounter a deafening silence about the most important details. Inside, inscribed on the marble floor, is a phrase: "May they never forget what made the struggle for liberation necessary and by what means it was won." This is a powerful philosophical appeal, but it is strikingly abstract. It names no enemy, no specific dates, no heroes. Which struggle exactly? Against whom? What specifically made it necessary? The stone remains silent. Above the main entrance is another inscription, officially translated as, "To the German Liberators, Ludwig I, King of Bavaria." However, other interpretations exist, such as, "The German Fighter for Liberation, Ludwig I, King of Bavaria." But in any case, the essence remains the same. It is the most general phrasing possible. There is not a single word about Napoleon, no mention of the year 1813, not even a hint of the allies with whom the Germans fought. Imagine a monument to World War II on which was written simply, "To the heroes of the struggle for freedom," without mentioning Nazism, Hitler, or specific dates. It's unthinkable. Any monument is, first and foremost, a historical document that records a specific event. Here, we see the opposite, a deliberate avoidance of any specifics. It is as if the creators intentionally designed a universal monument that could, if desired, be dedicated to any struggle for liberation in any era. Why was such ambiguity necessary in a place that was supposed to be the main symbol of victory over a specific enemy? Why such a deafening silence about the details where they matter most? Erased and vague inscriptions are now starting to look like a pattern, a common signature that connects monuments in different countries. But what if there is an even more blatant example of historical strangeness? One that manifests not in words, but in time itself. To see it, we will return to Russia, and turn to the most famous symbol of that victory, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Its construction history is so prolonged and full of inexplicable pauses It's as if they were desperately trying to avoid building it at all. Let's now turn our attention to what is arguably the most undeniable and majestic symbol of the Russian victory over Napoleon, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. Officially, it was conceived as a grandiose monument to the Patriotic War of 1812, a tribute to the people's heroism and the faith that strengthened the nation's spirit in its darkest hours. The idea for such a cathedral arose almost immediately after the war, in 1813, when a competition for the best design was announced. It would seem that on the wave of universal patriotic fervor, such a monument should have been erected in the shortest possible time, becoming a visible embodiment of national pride. However, the reality was completely different, strikingly contrasting with the logic and customs of the time. The construction of the cathedral, which was to become the main shrine of the empire and a symbol of its unshakable power, dragged on for decades. The first project, approved by Alexander I, turned out to be too complex and expensive. New competitions and new designs followed, each requiring revisions, approvals, and fundraising. The land for the future temple was consecrated in 1839, but the work proceeded at an extremely slow pace. The first stone was laid, the foundation began to rise, but progress stalled. By the mid-19th century, more than 40 years after the war's end, the construction site was still little more than a pit with some unfinished lower sections. Construction was effectively frozen. It wasn't until the 1860s, thanks to the efforts of Metropolitan Filaret, that work resumed with new energy. But even after that, the process continued for decades. Architectural challenges, economic difficulties, political turmoil, all of it slowed the project down. And here comes the most mysterious part. Even when the cathedral itself was seemingly completed, its final consecration and grand opening took place only in 1883. Thus, almost 70 years passed from the end of the war to the moment the main memorial cathedral was finally presented to the world. But that's not all. If we look at photographs from the early 20th century, we can see that even in 1907, more than 90 years after the victory, the exterior finishing of the building was still not complete. This means that the actual opening and solemn consecration of the temple, its final birth as a symbol, occurred almost 100 years after the heroic events it was meant to immortalize. Why was the greatest empire, capable of mobilizing vast resources to defend its land in the shortest time, unable to build its main memorial cathedral for an entire century? This is a question with no simple answer. Was it merely bureaucratic delays and financial problems? Or were there forces that deliberately hindered the process? Or perhaps the very history that this cathedral was meant to serve was so ambiguous that its final embodiment in stone was postponed again and again. This century-long delay adds another mysterious page to the history of the monuments to the War of 1812, and forces us to think more deeply about what is truly hidden behind the official versions. We see how monuments are built with incredible delays. How the inscriptions meant to glorify victory are either erased or made vague. This is no longer a coincidence, but a pattern that hints at deeper causes. But what if the creators of these monuments intentionally left us messages hidden in symbols? What if these Easter eggs are the key to understanding the true meaning of these structures? Messages that can be read in a completely different way. To find out, let's travel to Smolensk, where a monument with a double meaning awaits us, and to Tsarskoye Selo, where a friendly inscription in the enemy's language will make us doubt the official story even more. When the official history as told in texts, raises so many questions. It's worth looking at the language of symbols. Stone can be more eloquent than the most detailed chronicle, especially if a hidden code is embedded within it. Studying the monuments of that era, we discover that they are full of such ambiguities, as if the creators were deliberately playing with the viewer, offering an alternative interpretation of events. A striking example of such a double message can be found in Smolensk. Here, in memory of the heroes of 1812, an impressive monument has been erected. On top of a massive cliff, two mighty eagles spread their wings, guarding their nest. The official interpretation of this composition is simple and patriotic. The cliff is Russia, an impregnable fortress, and the eagles are the armies of Bagration and Barclay de Tolly, defending their home, their nest, from the enemy invasion. A scene worthy of the hero's memory, which at first glance raises no doubts. However, this composition has a second, completely opposite meaning, well known in European culture. There is an ancient Gallic legend according to which the greatest test for a young warrior, proof of his incredible valor and courage, was to climb a cliff and steal an eagle's egg from its nest. In this context, the monument ceases to be a symbol of defense and transforms into an allegory for the triumph of a fearless conqueror who managed to subdue an impregnable peak and seize its most precious prize. Why create a monument with such a contradictory subtext? Was it a coincidence? Or did the author intentionally embed this dual meaning into his creation, one that could be understood differently depending on the viewer's cultural code? An even more direct and shocking message awaits us in Tsarskoye Selo. In 1817, cast iron gates were installed here, also in honor of the victory in the Patriotic War. At first glance, they are ordinary, albeit elegant gates, with a touching and friendly inscription, "To my dear comrades in arms." It seems like a simple and sincere dedication from the emperor to his fellow soldiers. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. This inscription is written in Russian on only one side of the gates. On the other side, it is duplicated in French, the language of the recent enemy, the aggressor with whom a bloody war had just been fought. Let's pause and consider this fact. Imagine a memorial to the victory in World War II with an inscription, "To my dear fellow soldiers," duplicated in German. It is impossible to imagine. Such a message completely shatters the victor-vanquished paradigm. The inscription, "To my dear comrades in arms," addressed simultaneously to both Russians and the French, erases the line between ally and enemy. It doesn't sound like the triumphant cry of a winner, but like a sign of respect, reconciliation, or even an acknowledgement of a common cause. Is this a monument to victory or a monument dedicated to the end of some joint venture in which both sides were comrades in arms? This is a direct contradiction, cast in metal, to the official story of a ruthless war for survival. This gesture looks like a message for the initiated, for those who understood the true nature of the events that took place. These coded symbols and paradoxical inscriptions are no longer just oddities. They are forming a pattern, pointing to the fact that behind the facade of official history lies something entirely different. And it is noteworthy that behind many of these mysterious structures, both in Russia and in Germany, stands the shadow of the same man, the distinguished German architect Leo von Klenz. His work and his designs are so unusual and out of step with the style of the era that they look as if he brought his ideas from another time, or even another world. Our investigation is approaching its climax, leading us to a monument that is the apotheosis of all the strangeness and mystery we have encountered so far. Let us travel to the German city of Leipzig, where in 1913, exactly on the centenary of the decisive battle, what is perhaps the most massive and astonishing monument in Europe was unveiled. The monument to the Battle of the Nations. It is a colossal structure, 91 meters high, massive, overwhelming, and completely alien to the European architectural tradition. It is dedicated to the victory of the Allied armies of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden over Napoleon's army. But it is here, in this stone giant, that all the contradictions and inconsistencies reach their absolute peak. Let's start with the name itself, the Battle of the Nations. For a monument built in Germany with German funds, it sounds more than strange. The fact is, in this battle, the Germans were not a unified force fighting for liberation. German soldiers fought on both sides of the front. Saxons, Bavarians, Württembergers, and many others fought in the ranks of Napoleon's army against the Prussians and Austrians, who were part of the Allied forces. It was a fratricidal slaughter, where Germans literally fought against other Germans. So why did a nation decide to erect the most grandiose monument in its history to commemorate an event that was, in essence, a civil war for them? To glorify such a victory is like celebrating a bloody internal schism. This is the first and most profound paradox that official history conveniently ignores. But if the name is puzzling, the monument's architecture is simply shocking. It bears no resemblance to any classical European memorial. Its form has no triumphal arches, no elegant columns, no heroic statues in the ancient style. Instead, what stands before us is something that resembles a lost temple of the Aztecs, or the Khmer, a giant ziggurat from Mesopotamia, or a grim set from a science fiction film about an ancient, non-human civilization. Mighty, almost featureless stone blocks, cyclopean masonry, and stern, silent figures of guardians frozen at the entrance. All of it creates an atmosphere of mystical awe and primal power. The composition is saturated with a heavy, oppressive symbolism. At the foot of the monument stands a figure of the Archangel Michael, but this is not a bright celestial warrior, but rather a formidable pagan god, a guardian of the gates to another world. Inside, in a crypt, 8 enormous statues of warriors stand guard, looking more like stone idols watching over the eternal rest of their unknown masters. Higher up, in the Hall of Fame, stand 4 giant 9-meter figures personifying the virtues of the German people: bravery, faith, national strength, and self-sacrifice. But their faces are stern and emotionless. They express no joy of victory, but rather bear the mark of some great sorrow or the knowledge of a terrible secret. The dome is adorned with bas-reliefs depicting 324 horsemen with wings on their backs, soaring upwards. Who are these winged beings? Angels? Valkyries? Or representatives of some other race? This entire monument is not a monument to victory as we understand it. It is more like a grand temple dedicated to some ancient pre-Christian cult of power, sacrifice, and rebirth. Its architecture and symbolism are completely alien to the spirit of the 19th and early 20th centuries. They seem to have come from another era, another culture, another world. And the most astonishing thing is that all of this was built in 1913, long before the advent of modern technology capable of creating such powerful visual effects. This monument is the quintessence of all the mysteries we have encountered. It utterly shatters the neat picture of official history and forces us to ask the main question: to what event and to what gods is this Cyclopean temple actually dedicated? And why is its true meaning so carefully disguised? So, let us gather all the threads of our investigation. We began our journey with a simple, yet unsettling question. Why were the monuments to the Great War of the early 19th century built with an inexplicable, almost century-long delay? Then we saw how a historical inscription was cold-bloodedly erased from the main monument in Moscow. In Germany, we encountered a majestic memorial whose messages were so vague and abstract that they could have been dedicated to any event, except for a specific victory. We came across paradoxical messages, where yesterday's enemy was called a dear comrade in arms, and symbols that could be interpreted in the exact opposite way, as a glorification not of defense, but of a conqueror's prowess. And the crown of it all was the colossal alien temple in Leipzig, a monument to a fratricidal slaughter, looking like a sanctuary of an unknown ancient cult rather than a memorial of European history. When all these clues are put together, it becomes obvious. These stones do not glorify victory in the sense we are used to. They do not shout about the triumph of one nation over another. They whisper of something else. They tell a different story, one that is not in the textbooks. Is it possible that the war of the early 19th century itself was not what we are told it was? What if the real conflict, its goals, and even its participants were completely different? What if, under the guise of national wars, something much larger was hidden? An event whose true meaning needed to be forgotten by subsequent generations, replaced by an understandable and convenient legend about a struggle for freedom. We are not providing final answers. We are simply laying out the facts before you, and these facts are undeniable. The official version of history, when confronted with these silent stone witnesses, begins to crack at the seams. These monuments are not just architectural structures. They are time capsules, coded messages waiting for their moment, waiting for us to learn how to correctly read their language of symbols and omissions. What really happened in the early 19th century? One thing is clear: history is just beginning.